if you just tap right through them. So I find that's a very efficient way of controlling boost and the speed limiter with a 2-stage trigger. So we want to do a lot of damage to this hammerhead, so I'm going to put power to weapons. Again, that's mapped to the hat. Now notice as we transition from moving in the vehicle to moving on foot, I'm simply moving my hand. I am aiming with the mouse and getting analog movement in my left hand. So no matter what mode we're in or what vehicle we're using, movement is always controlled in the left hand. We're going to release all targets, second stage. I like to keep both weapon groups staggered in order to be able to constantly fire. So for example, I can fire with that one, and when that one's run out, I can fire with the other. And I have one weapon group for one set of weapons on one part of the trigger, and the other on the other part of the trigger. So in other words, I can stagger fire between the two to keep up constant pressure for shields and the like. Down, reset, and then pushing up pulls power away from the engines. So that is about as natural as you can get with a 5-way hat, is to pull the power away from the engines. And again, our EVA controls mimic in a lot of ways our flight controls. So we have analog control of up and down in EVA. We can analog roll in EVA. So for countermeasures, so as you can see, best of both worlds, analog movement with mouse aim. Analog brake lever comes into play and the acceleration limiter. All I have to do is squeeze gently. And as soon as we release, we get a nice cushion back. So the goal here is to go through all the key bindings again, look at what some ones that might be missing or what's changed, and reorganize the key bindings to make sure that everything is basically as optimal as it can be. When it comes to key bindings, since things change, you might want to change your key bindings every once in a while since they add new ones to the game, or you may just think of a better way of binding things. So it's always a good idea to go back in and reevaluate, see if everything still makes sense. And like I always say, key bindings are pretty much a ever-evolving process. Something that's always going to be changing, so it's something you want to take the time to look at every now and again. So I of course am using dual sticks, delta on the left, alpha on the right, and we have MFG crosswind pedals, as well as an entire Simpit's worth of controls that you can see on the stream. I'll probably cut in some other shots when I go ahead and cut this up and get ready to put it upon YouTube and that. We got the controls running along the sides. On the sides here, we got a G600 as for the mouse, which has tons and tons of buttons. So that gives us lots of flexibility. Means we can basically go keyboardless, which once we get into the on-foot key bindings, you'll see exactly how that works if you're not familiar with that. As well, we do have a keyboard, although basically there's not really much of a need for it, but it's there. There's also a G13, the venerable G13. And that one, again, doesn't get used all that often for obvious reasons. I'm not going to talk too much about anything that's not game related. So, for example, we have controls specifically in the pit that control various things for displays and through OBS and other programs that manage stuff that runs behind the scenes. Same thing for the targeting computer. I'm not going to touch on that, although there is a video that's up that I posted a little while back about how that works, so that gives you some idea of behind the scenes there. And we may not end up using every single button, and we may not use every single keybind, but we're just gonna go through and look at you know what makes sense to use. So a lot of things have changed order or their placement throughout different versions as well. So we'll take a look. Oh, one other thing I will mention is too, some of the controls you might not be able to see me access because they're like above or they're outside of the camera view. So I'll just kind of describe what we're doing as we go along and do it. So eject. Eject is this eject lever here. Of course, look behind. So I'm actually using the pinky button on the alpha for that. Mining mode. Oh man, I haven't been in a mining vehicle in a little while now. As we go through this, one other thing to kind of keep in mind when you're doing key bindings is you're going to want to make the controls that are used most frequently be the ones that you don't have to take your hands off of your main control devices for, or you don't have to reach for. You know, things that are critical or used the most often, and then as things become less critical or used less often, they should move further and further away, you know, further out of reach for you, basically. Not that they should be out of reach, but they should be not as front and center, not as prioritized. Mining mode. Let's see what we can use for mining mode. Well, let's get rid of that emergency exit seat since we're not going to use it right now. And then for mining mode, yeah, let's relegate that to one of the MFD buttons, since that's not going to be something that I use very often. If it is something that you use very often, then make it more prominent. Scanning mode. So that's going to be the CMS hat on the alpha. It's going to be CMS down. Quantum travel. For quantum travel, I've got that assigned to the right hat on the delta. Pushing it in for quantum travel. Missile operator mode. For me, that's going to be this red button on the alpha. Now, self-destruct, as we go through the cockpit controls here. Self-destruct is button 11, what this button is, and you guys can't see it, but it is basically a button that is triggered by both turning a key, an actual physical key, and flipping up a toggle with a guard on it. So when you... a little bit of a safety feature, so you don't accidentally activate self-destruct without absolutely meaning to. So that's why I said it in the cockpit. Coolers, man, hardly ever touch these, but they're bound. Yeah, so we got one of these up and down rockers on the MFD for increase and decrease cooler. Flight systems ready. That's actually above me as well. Open and close doors toggle. There is another lever above here that acts as opening and closing the exterior doors as a toggle. So just kind of reach up and grab that. Again, lock, unlock doors. That's another control. It's another control that I have up top as well. So it's sort of like those entry and exit controls. They're not used very frequently, so I kind of keep them out of the way, but I still have them not blocked by anything else or not behind any kind of key binding or combos. So these view controls in the vehicles, I've got look left and right and up and down bound to the mini stick on the alpha. And that's quite useful for having analog control over the third-person camera as well. And cycling the camera is actually pushing in on that mini stick. So zoom in and out relative. I've got that bound to one of the axes on the Delta mini stick. So again, that gives you some analog control. Got that bound to the x-axis. I don't think we will bind any of these other controls here for view. I don't see a real need to. I'm using track IR, so I don't need anything for free look. Alright, so flight, movement. Let's take a look. So pitch. So per pitch, that's your y-axis. Now yaw. Some people like yaw to be on the y-axis of their primary stick. Not me. I prefer to have everything set up like airplane controls. So, in other words, for yaw, we've got the pedals, and for roll, we have the x-axis of the stick. So, what we're doing here is we're making all of the rotational movements be on the stick and the pedals. And then for the translational movement, we're putting that on the left stick. So in other words, strafe up and down, that's going to be our z-axis. So with my Delta, I have it rotated. I've got it tilted so that the z-axis on the Delta is corresponding to down and up. So let me demonstrate that here. So here we are landed on the frozen ice just outside of New Babbage. So if I want to go up, I can rotate up. And if I want to go down, I can rotate down. So down, up. So that gives full analog control over down and up there. So if I just want to go up a little bit, I can just go up a little bit. Just want to go down a little bit, I can just go down a little bit. If I want to go down a lot, I can go down a lot, etc., etc. So that's sort of your standard dual stick setup. It's just that my stick is rotated in order to make that directional change a little more natural feeling. So sort of the same thing with strafe left and right. If we want to go right, we got the x-axis on the stick. We're going to go left. Same thing, we just hold left. If we want to go forward, forward. If we want to go back, we just pull it back. And roll, pitch, and yaw. So basically, that gives us sort of like clean aiming on one hand and clean movement on the other hand, so that one is not contaminating the other. Hello, Chesapeake. All right, let's set her down here again, and we'll take a look at a few more things. All right, so we will go back into flight movement. So that's where we looked at strafe left and right, throttle forward and back, and strafe up and down. So up, down, left, right, forward, back. Decoupled mode, I can access using one of the hat switches. I like being able to toggle back and forth between decoupled and coupled as needed. Now, boost. Boost is the first stage of the trigger on the Delta. So a light squeeze to the first click. You can probably hear that there on the mic, maybe. First click, that's boost. So a boost just increases your thruster's ability to change your direction. Speed limiter, relative. So the way that this one works here is through the mini analog stick on the Delta. So because we're using a dual stick setup without any kind of throttle or anything like that, we need a way of adjusting the speed limiter so that we can basically tell the flight control system how fast that we want to set our maximum speed to be. So using the mini stick allows us to control that. So I will lift off here. And I'll point up a little bit so you can more easily see the HUD. But as I move the mini stick up and down, it's in relative mode. So in other words, the amount of deflection is the rate of change. You can see that little square moving up and down on the left-hand side next to the velocity indicator. That's controlling where our maximum speed is. And it's a logarithmic scale on the HUD. So in other words, this is much more than where it appears to be just linearly. And of course, we may not be able to hit those speeds based on atmosphere. And as we previously looked at, the other axis on the mini stick controls our manual zoom. Again, that's in relative mode, so the greater the deflection, the faster the change. The reason why we're using relative mode there instead of absolute is because the mini stick has a return to center mechanism. So in other words, if we had absolute, then it would, as soon as we released it, whatever we had set would revert to 50%. So all right, let's go back in and look at a few more controls. Okay, so we just looked at the speed limiter. So another important part of the speed limiter is the on-off hold/toggle keybinding. Now, since we have boost on the first stage of the trigger, it only makes sense to release the speed limiter with the second stage of the trigger. So here you'll hear the first stage, there's the first stage, and here's the second stage. Might not be able to hear it because it doesn't make that much of a click on the Delta. But click, click, and that gives us the release of the speed limiter. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if we push through to the first stage, our boost is active and our boost gauge is draining. As soon as we hit the second stage, it'll release that speed limiter. You can see the box changing as I flip through and hit the second stage. That way we don't have to manually increase the speed limiter if we want any kind of quick action. If we just wanted to get up to maximum speed in whatever direction, consequences be damned, hitting that second stage allows us to quickly ignore the speed limiter. And that way we're just pushing through boost in order to get that to happen. If you just want to quickly go straight through both triggers, then you can do that. It's so fast that boost doesn't even really activate it if you just tap right through them. So I find that's a very efficient way of controlling boost with a two-stage trigger. Boost and the speed limiter with a two-stage trigger. All right, let's go in and take a look at a few more things. Speed limiter reset to SCM. Again, this is just to reset the speed limiter back to default. That way the you just set it to whatever the maximum SCM speed of whatever ship you're currently in. Chesapeake. I think you'd get used to it because it becomes more intuitive because everything is physicalized to something. Alright, so this next one here is very overlooked, I would say. This is the acceleration limiter, which is different from the speed limiter. Now, the way that we're going to control this is we're going to use the analog brake lever. I know you can't really see it, but later on I'll take a little bit of B-roll and put that in. And the analog brake lever on the Alpha is going to control our acceleration limiter. So this doesn't control speed, it controls the amount of acceleration that the thrusters can put out. So let me give you an example, and I'll show you where it's actually quite useful. So where the acceleration limiter is being shown on the HUD is on the far left-hand side next to the boost gauge, labeled THR. And there's a little chevron where the acceleration limit is. It's currently at 100. The acceleration gauge shows up to 120%. The reason why it goes up that high is because sometimes boost kicks in and it will basically show you that much extra thrust, basically, is how that works. So right where it is now, that little chevron, that's 100%. You can see the thrusters fluctuating. And the actual colored in bar is the actual output of the thrusters. So we're about at 1G right now. So our thrusters have to accelerate us upwards in order to keep us aloft. Now, we could do a couple things in order to reduce our altitude. One, we could pitch down, sort of fly towards the surface, get close, and then pitch up as we get close enough. We could thrust down as well. Or we could also enter decoupled mode and simply apply a little bit of force downwards, and it will carry us downwards basically the entire time. So decoupled, apply a little bit of downward force, and it's just going to keep us moving in that direction. But there's another way we can do it too. We can limit the thruster's output using the acceleration limiter. So for example, if I squeeze on the analog brake lever, you'll see that chevron move. The harder I squeeze that, the more that chevron is moving to reduce our acceleration, and that will slowly cause us to sink towards the ground. In this case, it's the frozen river. But this is, as soon as you release the analog brake lever, your thrusters go back to full output. So the advantage to this is you can get really smooth landings by just using that acceleration limiter. A lot smoother than you can get by simply just thrusting down. just going to use the acceleration limiter here.
Landing gear deployed. Landing complete.
Just to touch down nicely like that.
Complete.
But just by squeezing that analog brake lever to reduce acceleration when you're under the effects of gravity will cause you to sink at a nice, controllable, smooth rate. Probably went a little bit smoother than that. Again, you do not have to land like an airplane. However, it beats hovering over the pad looking like you have no idea where you are and where you're trying to land. But even if we basically just hold still, anytime you're in gravity, so nothing on the movement, left hand totally off any kind of strafe. All I have to do is squeeze gently, descend. As soon as we release, we get a nice cushion back. It's almost like a helicopter collective in one way. You get that nice smooth touchdown just with one control. If you're putting in too much because it's spring loaded, you just release and you kind of get that nice little cushion back from that acceleration limiter. But you definitely want an analog axis for that one. All right, let's take a look at a few other things. So we were under flight movement, and we were looking at the acceleration limiter. Match target velocity. I am almost certain that that one is still broken. I could be wrong. Space brake. That just basically counters whatever your current movement is and helps you come to a stop. Not super necessary, but if you get into some kind of random spin, it's nice to have bound. I just have that bound to one of the buttons on the Delta. G-force safety, or G-safe, as it's sometimes known. That's a hard toggle back here that you guys can't see back this way. Same thing for ESP. That is also a hard toggle. Cruise control, that's on the hat on the Delta, easily accessible. If you're strictly using dual stick, you'll definitely want to have something set for cruise, and that just uses whatever your speed limiter setting is. Landing system. So you guys have seen this by now since I showed it a few times already. And that's just tied to the Arduino that manages the lights. VTOL. What's a hat button? simply for some ships because sometimes you really need to have control over VTOL. It can make a big difference, and it give you some options to not have to do a full turn in certain cases on some ships. Auto land. What did I set for auto land? I haven't used auto land in forever. It's got to be this top. Oh. Well, I guess I have auto land set on here. I would probably say that's not necessary. We can probably free that up to use it for something else, actually. Yeah, it's unbind auto land. We don't need auto land. So yeah, a lot of anything that's relating to movement, whether it be the axes or something else button-wise, that's all on the left hand. And same thing for engage quantum drive. That's just one of the hat buttons as well. That's the right hat up. So again, anything that's to do with movement or transit or travel or anything like that, that's where we want it over on here. Because the left hand is always going to deal with movement. And as we move into controls for like on foot and things like that, same kind of thing. Stuff that has to do with movement is going to be on the left hand. Docking mode, invoke docking. These are set to buttons over on the right MFD, I believe. I haven't used docking in a little bit. Or actually, maybe they're on this MFD. Yeah, this one here. Shows you how much I touch that stuff. This is a good idea why to go back through your key bindings to see if there's anything you can change to be more efficient with. And you can make yourself a chart too of your key bindings. But I also find that if you're not using something and you can't remember where it was bound, there's probably a good reason for you can't remembering where it was bound. It's probably time to change it. Alright, so targeting. Because everything that's to do with aiming, shooting, and that is on the right stick, we're going to make sure that all of our targeting controls we're dealing with on the right stick. It just makes it sort of parallel and mirrored to the movement being on the left stick. Alright, so pin selected target and unpinned selected target. These are useful not only for yourself, but also if you have a ship that has like a turret gunner or multiple turrets, because you can mark those targets 1, 2, and 3, and they'll show up for your gunners as well. So pinning targets is quite useful there. So I think I have, yeah. So pushing in on the top right hat is our pin and unpin target. Using the same one there because it doesn't matter. If it's already pinned and we try to pin it again, it will just unpin it then. Lock target and unlock target. So this is whatever the reticule is over. So the way I have this set up is the scroll wheel on the alpha here is a 2-stage push-in. So in other words, it scrolls up, scrolls down, just like your mouse wheel, pushes in like your mouse wheel, but it also pushes past that first stage into a second stage, just like a 2-stage trigger. So for locking a target, first stage. To unlock the target, push through to the second stage. And the reason why these are different, whereas these ones are the same, you might be wondering, is because we always want to be able to unlock all targets. And this allows us to do that simply by pushing through to the second stage. If we want to lock onto a new target that's right in front of us, well, we can just push the first stage. And if we want to unlock completely, then we can push through the second stage. And that just gets rid of everything. Now, I don't have a lot of these other ones here set up. Enable, disable, look ahead. I don't use look ahead at all, so I don't have a switch to enable and disable that. Simply because, again, track IR, so it basically negates the need to have that bound to anything. Same thing for enabling and disabling. Target padlocks, don't find that's useful personally. You might want to try it, but auto zoom, I do not like auto zoom, except for maybe just a tiny bit. Once again, I can manually control zoom over here, so I don't have a need to have that bound. This is one that I think deserves at least a little bit of attention, and we'll kind of demonstrate it a little bit later perhaps, but lead and lag reticle. It's basically in game settings you can choose whether or not you have lead pips or lag pips. Let me see if we can find the setting here. Just basically it's the style of aiming. You're either trying to aim the crosshair to the pip or you're trying to drag the pip over on top of the target. So the first one is lead, the second one is lag. And some people like one, some people like the other. Lag pip is much better for targeting specific parts of a ship, especially larger ships or ships that are close. I find that lead pip is a little bit better for aiming at targets that are, further away or a little bit dancing around the screen a little bit. But the thing about lag pip as well is because your eyes are focusing on putting the pip over the target rather than the reticle over the pip. With lag pip, you can kind of tell what your target is doing a little bit easier. You're not sort of splitting your vision between the two. So lag pip can be useful in that way as well. We probably passed talking about where the pip setting is while I was talking there. Let's see if we can find it. Vehicles targeting pip reticle. So lead is what I have on by default. But by going into these keybindings, for targeting here, for lead and lag, that's controlled by the index hat on the alpha. So we're looking at this hat right up here. So pushing that in changes lead and lag back and forth. That gives us the option to change it on a per situation or per target basis. If one is working better at the moment, then you can flip back and forth. You do have to learn to use both that way, but I do find that it's a useful thing to have. On the alpha, as we discussed, that controls the pip type, so I can flip back and forth between both pips. So there's lag pip, that's where I need to put the pip over the target, and there's lead pip where I need to put the crosshair over the pip. So lag's a lot better for hitting specific parts of a ship and watching the movement. Lead's a lot better for just aiming at the reticle. So once again, for target cycling, vehicles target cycling, all of these controls, I'm not going to go through each every single individual one, but basically all of the hats and everything on here are controlling these targeting options. Forward and back, pinned forward and back. So in other words, you rotate between those targets that you had pinned. Attackers, reset the closest. That's an important one, I find. So I have that dedicated. Hostiles, forward and back. So you can quickly go through. You don't have to manually wait for something to be under the reticle. You can just, anything that's already tagged hostile, you can go back to that. Reset to closest for hostiles, which is different than attackers. Attackers is going for whatever one is attacking you right at the moment. So in other words, I want a key binding that immediately allows me to find my closest attacker and lock onto them. And then for all hostiles, I have different key bindings for that. So if there's a hostile that's not attacking me, I can hit that key binding to get to the closest hostile as well. I have one for friendlies. Now, one thing that I have set up for on the alpha is the analog mini stick is pulling double duty. It's also through the Virpil software assigned as a hat. So it's pulling double duty as another set of buttons, as well as being analog access to control that look, that free look. So again, friendlies is not something that you use probably very often. Main reason might be just to be able to maybe just see what somebody's status is, or be able to just log on to them and quickly follow them. Chances are if you're playing with other players, you're going to have party markers for them anyway, so it's not a huge thing. But one reason why you might want to have this as well is if that match speed function is working, then you can use that to match speed. But again, I'm pretty sure that that is currently, in this current patch, is still not working properly. It hasn't been working properly for a little while. Subtarget. Subtarget is useful to be able to go through and target individual components on the ship. So for example, like engines, you can manage which part of the ship you actually want to hit. So again, that's sort of like with lag pip. You can use the pip to hit certain areas. By default, it will basically hit the center of mass. It'll basically calculate for the center of the mass of the target. But by sub-targeting, you're trying to get the targeting system to land shots on, a specific part of the ship. So, flight target hailing. Man, I do not comms call many people, so I don't have that bound. Although we could probably bind it to something. Man, what did we set here? Let's see if we can figure this out. Well, let's set that for hail target for now. One of the buttons on the MFDs. Again, it's not something that I use often, but it might be good to have bound, so we'll set it to something. Ping, angle, activate, increase, and decrease. So, for activating the ping is actually the second stage of the trigger. And the reason why we can use the second stage of the trigger is because we have disabled everything in scan mode. So even though the second stage of the trigger is going to be used also for weapons, it's can pull double duty here. And then again, because of targeting not working when we're in scan mode, we can reuse the hat buttons for targeting there as well. So again, targeting, scanning, getting more info out of things, that's on the right stick. Again, vehicle scanning. The scanning mode toggle, that one is not the one you want to set. It's actually the one up here that matters. So we don't bother with the one down there. The one down here is basically depreciated. So now for scanning, activating scanning is actually controlled by the by the CMS switch on, or sorry, the activating the scanning is actually controlled by the first stage of the trigger. So again, holding the first stage of the trigger, sort of like how we set the two-stage trigger on the Delta setup. The two-stage trigger on the Alpha is controlling ping and scan. So it allows us to, first stage, sort of scan, second stage, send out the scanning, the actual ping. And again, same for increase and decrease scanning angle with the reusing the hat keys. Mining laser, again, because mining mode is a separate mode, we can reuse basically the same key bindings there. So firing the mining laser is one stage of the trigger. Changing the mining laser mode is another stage of the trigger. Increasing and decreasing power. I got that on the scroll wheel on the left-hand side here. And again, we can also have this set to the axis as well. And mining modules, I have them set to the hat. It's over here on the Alpha as well. Jettison cargo. I think we set that to, yeah, the big maglock servo button. We had set that to. So if you're hauling Quantanium and you need to get rid of it real quick, that will help you there. At least it should. Turret movement. I actually like the analog turret movement, so I've got that set to pitch and yaw here. Again, all of our targeting controls transfer over to the turrets as well. Turret advanced. Again, we could set these to more hats and buttons on the right-hand side just to control, or even the left-hand side here. Yeah, let's actually do that. Let's set one of these hats to recenter the turret. And let's use the trigger. Let's use the trigger to change the gyro stabilization. Sometimes it's worth changing the gyro stabilization just based on your movement and the ship's movement. Not going to touch the speed limiter. We're using analog control, so I don't need to do that. Cycle. What did we have set to cycle? Oh yes, yeah. Pulling back on the index hat for cycling the fire mode on the turret. So I just let you set it to staggered or combined, fire all the guns at once. Actually, since we're here, and we talked about keybinding the turret, let's take a quick look at that, since we have access to a turret. Now I could use the mouse, but actually in Star Citizen I find the stick actually works pretty good.
Aegis combat assist activated. Systems green.
I find sometimes it takes a little bit for the turret capacitor to kick in. Yeah, only one of the guns is gaining any kind of charge rate at the moment. But where the ship controls for targeting already are mapped to the stick, they also double up for the turret as well. So for regular weapons, weapon group 1 and weapon group 2, those are their different stages on the triggers. Now I actually have this inverted because I find a lot of ships, their default loadouts have sort of like the opposite effect. Like for the Vanguard, for example, the Warden has the Revenant by default set to the first weapon group, and the smaller guns set to the second weapon group. So I've actually inverted these. So button 4 is actually the stage 2 of the trigger, and button 3 is actually the stage 1. Did I say that right? Yeah, button 4 is stage 2, and button 3 is stage 1. It's just how the buttons happen to be labeled by default on the stick. But by having them inverted that way, that means that by default, you know, some of those ships with the ballistic weapons won't fire on the first stage that way by default. And additionally, I've got some stuff set up through Joystick Gremlin that allows me to flip that by toggling this switch here. So it basically inverts those buttons, so by the time they get to Star Citizen, they are inverted. So if the ship has an opposite default loadout or whatever, and I don't have time to manually, or don't feel like manually setting it up to the MFD in the ship, then that just allows me to manually flip that. Yeah, this is going to, I'm going to be cutting this up and tossing in some B-roll with alternate angles, and be posting it on YouTube, yes. So, again, on the index hat, on the Alpha, cycle, gimbal assist, standard gimbal, and gimbal lock. Not something that's always super useful, but it's nice to have that as an option. Sometimes you need a little bit extra reach, and sometimes the gimbal allows you to get that. One reason why you might want to have that is for, again, like a ship like the Vanguard, if you're using an all repeater loadout currently, there's no point in using size 5 repeaters because they're just going to drag the velocity of all the other repeaters down when you're using them. So you're going to have naturally a size 4 repeater on there. Sometimes you might want to use the gimbal as an actual gimbal, in which case being able to toggle that with a button press is very handy, being able to turn the gimbal on and off or fix it forward if that's working better. Again, it depends on the target. It could depend even on the server. Sometimes you just need a little bit of extra reach, so it's just kind of handy to have. So missile operator mode, we activated again with the red button on the Alpha. But to launch missiles, we're controlling that with the trigger. So once we're in missile operator mode and we've locked on, we can use the trigger to launch the actual missile. Cycling the missile type is done with the hat switches. So in other words, we can, the cycling the missile type itself is actually done with the black button on the head of the Alpha, so I can cycle through the missiles types. And increasing and decreasing armed missile types is through the hat switch above that. So again, any kind of weapons management we're keeping on this stick. So now we're getting into shields and countermeasures. So for launching a burst countermeasures is done through the CMS switch. CMS hat on the alpha. So this is the thumb hat, sort of like the neutral thumb hat. So going to the right gives us decoy. So that's, you know, basically flares. Going to the left deploys chaff, or as Star Citizen calls it, noise. A noise field. Setting the default burst sizes up and down, we control that through the MFD. It's not something that you typically have to mess with too much. And when you do the burst, you can hold down and it will slowly increase the number for that one particular burst and then launch that many countermeasures. Panic launch launches a bunch of them at once. I actually have that set to pushing up. Now, shields. This is not something that you're going to use very often in smaller ships, but ships with size 3 shields or greater, you can adjust the shield facings on. So it's a control that I want to have semi-handy, but, you know, in a fighter or a smaller ship, I'm not really using it. So the way I've sort of managed that is I've set up a shift mode on the Delta. And I'm using the button that's below the trigger on the Delta. And as it enters that shift mode, I've set it up to change the color from green to yellow, just to indicate that it's in that shift mode. And when it's in the shift mode, this top middle hat is these buttons that are controlling the shield. So front, back, left, right, corresponding to the directions on the hat, and pushing in on the hat to reset. So you have to hold that and manipulate that. Again, if you're in a larger ship, chances are you might be running multi-crew and somebody else is managing the shields anyway. Or if you are managing the shields and you're doing it through one of the MFDs in-game. So not something that's probably needed unless, you know, you're soloing a larger ship. So in that case, it's good to have bound, but it's something that's not immediately necessary, so it's behind that shift mode for me. Now, the reason why we're using that shift mode is because we're also controlling the power triangle assignments using that same hat. Because in smaller ships, the power triangle matters a lot. Matters a lot in terms of how you're able to get the most out of the ship. In larger ships, it affects things as well, but this allows us to have that sort of same space on the stick not be taken up by anything else. Let's let it serve a dual function, basically. So I've done a video already on the power management triangle. I'll just go over it briefly here at this point. So I have the hat corresponding to the actual directions of the triangle. So weapons is left, engines is down, shields is right, and we have an engines decrease for basically anti-engines, because the hat is a 5-way hat. So pushing up will actually pull power away from the engines. I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. And reset assignments is pushing the hat actually in. So if you look at the power management triangle down here in the bottom left, you can see everything's at 33, 33, 33. So left, right, down, reset, and then pushing up pulls power away from the engines. So that is about as natural as you can get with a 5-way hat, is to pull the power away from the engines. Now, if you just had a 4-way hat, then you, instead of having it pull power away from the engines, you could make the up direction reset to center. But given how important the power triangle is, having it set to a hat is basically the most sensible thing. You do not want to be taking your hands off of your primary controls to reach for that power management triangle. It is incredibly essential. And once again, there's some other ones that you can do here. You can have set to max, set to min, increase, set to max, hold. You can use them. I don't find they're too terribly useful. Some people prefer just to pump everything to max or min. Keybindings, do whatever makes the most sense for you, but the key part about the power management is, I would say, is it's got to be on some kind of hat. It's got to be on something that you do not have to take your hands off of your controls.
Travel initiated. Quantum travel complete.
Alright, so we're going to be dealing with the Hammerhead and its escorts, and we'll do a few keybinds here as we go through this. So this isn't really for efficiency reasons, this is more for keybinding logic reasons. So there's the Hammerhead. So I can hit the CMS switch down, allow us to send out scanning pings. I can use the second stage of the trigger in order to actually initiate that ping, as we talked about previously. The reason why we can double up on that trigger is because in the scan mode, we're not actually shooting. So I don't see any escorts here for this Hammerhead. So we're actually going to get the cannon enabled, since that's really what the size 5 weapons are for. And I have one weapon group for one set of weapons on one part of the trigger, and the other on the other part of the trigger. So in other words, I can stagger fire between the two to keep up constant pressure for shields and the like. So we want to do a lot of damage to this Hammerhead, so I'm going to put power to weapons. Again, that's mapped to the hat on the Delta. So it looks like the escorts actually spawned here. I'm going to put a little bit of a distance to give me a little bit of breathing room, and I'm going to disable that cannon again on the MFD. That way we can take advantage of the faster velocity of the repeaters. Oh, and as luck would have it, that Hammerhead just ran into the asteroid, so bonus. So let's throw some missiles at the other ships here. So for countermeasures, flare, or decoy, as Star Citizen calls it, gonna be that CMS right. Here's our noise field, or chaff. It's the CMS left. Panic launch. CMS up. Of course, as we hold the decoy launch, we can launch more. Missile operator mode, entering that is the red button. I can change the missile type with a black button on the head of the Alpha, and I can change the number of missiles by using the hat just above that. So for example, if I want to lock 2 missiles, then you can see it's set for 2, there's 1, 4, just rotates through them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can go down the other way. So once the missiles are actually locked, pulling the trigger launches the missile. Because we can't use the trigger for firing guns anyway in missile operator mode, so it pulls double duty there as well, just like it pulls double duty for scan and ping.
Shields under fire.
So this Valkyrie actually probably warrants the cannon. Let's turn the cannon back. You can see actually, I'll demonstrate it here for you. As I enable and disable the cannon, it will affect the targeting pip. With the cannon on, it's harder to aim because the point that it's aiming for is 700 meters per second instead of 1400 meters per second with the repeaters, because it will use whatever the lowest velocity is for all of your weapons. But larger, slower targets are easier to hit, so. And cannons just so happen to be more efficient at that anyway. So yeah, there's some examples of doubling up on keybinds there for scanning, for missiles, and guns. Toggle power. So we'll go into power here, flight power, toggle power. So up and down, or sorry, not power, up and down. Toggling power on and off is actually up above, where you guys can't see. So I have power on-off toggles. So for thrusters, shields, and weapons over on this side, I can manually switch those on and off. Now, decreased throttle min, increased throttle, and increased throttle max. These are not the throttle for speed. These are like the power throttle to limit the power output. And these are controlled on the MFDs. Not something you're using a lot, but again, binding it there is good. Flight HUD. So, cycle pitch ladder mode, that changes how the pitch ladder is displayed and whether or not it stays centered when you're looking around. Scoreboard is mostly used in Arena Commander. Map, that'll bring up the map if it's available. And wiping the helmet visor is where you wipe your character's face, basically, if it's fogged up. Again, these are all actually on the bottom row of this MFD here. Let me see if we can... Don't know if that pitch ladder one still works. No, I don't think the pitch ladder one still works. When it did work, that pitch ladder it would move around regardless of where you were looking. So I'm just looking around using Track IR right now. It used to drag that pitch ladder along with you. So wherever you looked in free look, you could see what your pitch was. But it doesn't do that anymore. Not since they changed the HUD, it appears. So on foot controls, so we're actually controlling a lot of these using the mini stick on the Delta. And for on foot, we also have a lot of key bindings, like I mentioned, on the G600 as well. So that's going to give us the benefits of having analog movement and having mouse aim. So it's like the best of both worlds, really. So I'll just kind of go over a few key bindings here, and then you can kind of get an idea. So I'm using the mini stick. I'm not using the whole stick, and you don't need as much precision for moving around as you do flying, so that's why I'm not using the whole stick. But there's also another reason, which I'll explain here shortly as we go through the controls. Well, I'm not using the whole stick, I'm using the mini stick for actually moving. So for jump, this is stage 2 of the trigger on the Delta. Crouching, push the stick in, you know, that's your standard FPS on a sort of console controller style. Prone, we got one of the hats here. Sprint, just sort of like we have on the flying part. We have sprint is the first stage of the trigger, and jump is the second stage of the trigger. You know, because jump cancels sprint, it doesn't really matter. Lean left and lean right. So one of the reasons why I wanted to use the mini stick for movement is so we can use lean left and lean right on the actual stick itself to lean left and right. And the same thing goes for EVA. When we're in EVA, we can use this to roll left and right. So that gives us full analog control over EVA as well. Now, in order to lean left and right, we have to double up these axes as buttons, and in order to do that, I've set them as buttons in the Virpil software as well. So I think at 70% and 30% deflection, respectively. Because leaning is, in Star Citizen, is a digital function currently. You don't control the amount that you lean, you control whether or not you're leaning left or right. Again, a lot of these other ones here are not bound because they're bound to the mouse and all of its buttons. I do have some things. This hat here is basically for various item commands, like holstering weapons, dropping items, inspecting. I have a couple other double binds here as well. Again, for EVA, This is the roll left and right. So in EVA, rolling left and right is actually analog. So that's what the x-axis will get us there. Again, EVA, full analog control, just like we have when flying. We can strafe up and down by twisting this. Again, strafe left and right. That's the mini stick on the alpha. Forward, backwards. Mini stick on the alpha. I think I'll set brake to be pushing in on the mini stick. And boost, of course, is just like boosting in space in a vehicle. It's the first stage of the trigger. Ground vehicles are set up in much the same way. I'm not going to go completely through that again. Electronic access, I don't really bind any of that. There's no point. Don't have any of the emotes bound. Now, for head tracking, I do have a video on what I do for head tracking, but basically there is a flip down trigger on the alpha. So in addition to the 2-stage trigger, there's a flip down trigger that goes in front of the main 2-stage trigger. When the flip trigger is in its up position, head tracking is disabled. I have to have that flip trigger basically deployed and ready to go in order for head tracking to be on. And then if I pull through the flip trigger so that it comes in contact with the main trigger, I still haven't triggered stage 1 of the main trigger, just that it's made contact. You might be able to hear the metal on metal as I do that. Probably hear that through the mic. So just as it makes contact, it disables head tracking again. And that forces my view to be centered. That way when I'm shooting things, my view is not all over the place as my head's moving, and it makes it easier to track targets. It makes it easier for the reticle or whatever it is to stay relatively in the same part of the screen, and I find that helps for being able to shoot things. So just to kind of give a demonstration of that, right now head tracking is disabled because the flip trigger is up. So the flip trigger is now in the ready position. So now I'm able to freely look around. If I want to be able to start shooting something, as soon as I pull the flip trigger, it snaps to center. And then I can pull straight through that flip trigger into the main trigger to begin firing weapons. Now, because we're in an armistice zone right now, the weapons will not fire, but that allows me to quickly recenter my view to be able to shoot things and not get disoriented. Alright, so we're almost through the full list. A lot of this stuff, again, I don't have set here because a lot of this I have set on the mouse. The G600 has a additional mouse button on top, and I actually use that to control inner thought. I find that's very useful. Basically, I just have that in the mouse software mapped to the F key, as if it was a keyboard button. Yeah, I think that goes through most of the key bindings and a good idea of why I have them set the way they are. But we can get a few more examples. So let's actually run a few missions here, run a few things, and we'll look at a few of these key bindings and what they actually correspond to.
Landing complete.
So we'll just get out here for a moment. So again, with the mini stick, I'm able to freely move around. I can crouch, I can go prone, I can even roll on across the ground just by tilting the stick, so that's a very natural movement. I can run by holding the trigger, I can jump by going to stage 2 of the trigger. And again, I am aiming with the mouse and getting analog movement in my left hand. So no matter what mode we're in or what vehicle we're using, movement is always controlled in the left hand. That way, regardless of if our right hand is on the mouse or if our right hand is on the stick, it's the same basic movement structure.
Launch complete.
So here's a situation where I both want to get up to maximum speed as fast as possible, and I want to do that by not only boosting but releasing the speed limiter. So in this situation here, I can release the speed limiter by first going to boost on the first stage, and then I can release the speed limiter simply by going to that second stage just for an instant, and it goes right to the maximum speed. It releases that speed limiter. If I want to enable the speed limiter again, all I have to do is quickly click in through to the second stage. So let's exit here into EVA. We can pull up our weapon through key bindings on the 600. And again, our EVA controls mimic, in a lot of ways, our flight controls. So we have analog control of up and down in EVA. We can analog roll in EVA. Analog forward, back, left, right. So we can really take advantage of some freedoms of movement afforded to us through analog. Once again, we'll reach overhead for power.
Aegis combat assist activated. Systems green.
And we'll assign max power to shields so we can get them charged up as fast as possible.
Launch complete. Landing gear retracted.
Well, let's head down to the data center. So there's some turrets. So targeting the turret. First stage of that scroll wheel on the alpha. We're going to release all targets, second stage.
Shields under fire.
So we will blow up all these turrets. I like to keep both weapon groups staggered in order to be able to constantly fire. So for example, I can fire with that one, and when that one's run out, I can fire with the other. That's useful as well for keeping constant pressure on shields on ships. Not so useful on the turrets. So, mini stick on the alpha, or mini stick on the delta rather. So yeah, mini stick on the delta, zoom in, zoom out, so we can get a closer look at what we're shooting, since these turrets don't have any kind of targeting pips. They sure do take a lot of damage though. But the AI is not particularly reactive with them. Alright, so we'll lower the landing gear with the landing gear lever.
Landing gear deployed.
And once again, to land smoothly, we will use the analog brake lever, which controls the acceleration limiter. So that just allows us to touch down extra smooth.
Landing complete.
And then we can exit. Now notice as we transition from moving in the vehicle to moving on foot, I'm simply moving my hand from the stick to the mouse. And my left hand at all times remains on the left stick, because we have it set up for full analog control on foot as well. Let's grab us a gun. Once again, controlling inner thought using that extra mouse button on the G600. So, just by using my ring finger, it's like holding down F. That way I can still hit any number of the side buttons on the mouse, and I'm not taking up anything on my left hand in order to do that either. With the analog movement on the mini stick, that frees up the rest of the stick for other things. Unfortunately, there is a bug that prevents you from leaning, and I think that is happening right now. So it looks like the leaning is not actually working. Crouch for pushing the mini stick in. So as you can see, best of both worlds, analog movement with mouse aim. So if I want to walk forward slowly, backwards, left, right, slowly, give that full range of analog movement. We'll grab this guy's gun. Oh, can't fire the gun. Let's pull out our own gun. Where'd that guy run off to? There he is.
Go! They do something else!
Gun's not firing. Don't know why it doesn't want to fire. Ah, looks like it consumed one of the magazines I had on my person. Weird. Yeah, even if I try to use the keyboard controls for leaning, it doesn't appear to be working currently. You can see the HUD tilts, but the actual player model doesn't seem to be doing anything, so that appears to be bugged right now. And this was the key binding that we looked at earlier for opening and closing the exterior of the ship. So I can reach up, open and close just by pulling a lever that's above.
Launch complete. Landing gear rejected.
So once again, for those extra smooth landings, this is where that analog brake lever comes into play and the acceleration limiter. Anytime there's any kind of gravity, including on these pads, just a light squeeze
Landing complete.
and you sink down nice and easy. Really clean.
Pete, have a pleasant stay.
Alright, let's go change the equipment on this ship. Actually, we should power off first, because sometimes if you don't, the ship will kick up off the pad, and it makes life miserable when it spawns again. Anyway, guys, it's getting late. Been at this for a few hours now. I think we covered everything and didn't really have any questions this session, so I think I'm going to call it here. And I will start the process of putting this all together and throwing it up as something a little more organized. So you guys have a good one, and we will see you next time.